Good morning, and it's Wednesday, Mental Health Week. We're halfway through May is Mental Health, and it's slightly before 7 because I am having to be a wee bit faster this morning, I guess. That lovely waterfall. Cool. Look how beautiful that is. That rock. Just okay. Good morning. I hope everyone is well. Mental Health Week. This morning I'm talking about codependency. Codependency is by far my favourite subject, yet least understood. And although it doesn't fall into the character of a mental health issue, it doesn't fall into DSM 3, 4 or 5, but it's my opinion that it is at the root of most of major dysfunction in human behaviour. So that's my belief, and my interpretation of codependency is somewhat different and perhaps slightly controversial. Morning, Cairn. And slightly controversial. So codependency, what is it? If you're not familiar with that word, morning mate, it's absolutely stunning up here this morning. I'm a wee bit earlier because I've got to be somewhere. Right, Mental Health Week, we're in May. I could get distracted and just talk to people that send me little links all day, but that's not going to get us through what we need to get through here. So codependency, by far my most favourite subject. Absolutely love it, but it's my least understood. I feel that when I thought that studying addiction and working with addiction was complex, codependency is, wow, super complex, and I don't profess to understand it completely. I understand it in my own way. That's what I'm saying. I'm going to share with you what my understanding of codependency is now. A lot of people may never have heard of it. A lot of people may have heard of codependency and relate it to the codependent is the one living with an addict, and they put codependency and addiction together, i.e. the enabler that enables the addict to continue with their behaviour. And I disagree with that because I see codependency as an addiction, actually. So, and I see that codependency is an adaptive response to shame. So if we go into shame, by the mere merit of that word, the majority of us have been shamed at some point in our life. Evidence will say that shame doesn't start to become apparent until some science will say that it's 18 months. Some science will say that it's 3 years. So let's just, for an argument, say that shame takes hold of the child very early on, and shame could be one of the first traumas that the child experiences. So if you're asking what is codependency, codependency could be that you have difficulty making decisions, you have difficulty identifying what your feelings are, have difficulty communicating in relationships, you're looking for value and approval from external sources rather than value and approving yourself, looking outside for validation, having fears of abandonment, and doing things for other people and not able to do them for yourself. These are the kind of things that if you experience any of that I would encourage you to go and look up codependency, because codependency could be at the heart of some of the challenges and difficulties that you're facing. Okay, so as I've said, this is my favourite subject, but my least understood. I absolutely love it. I love codependency as a theory, and I disagree with some of the people. I absolutely value the work of Melody Beattie, but my view and opinion of hers is somewhat different on codependency. And good morning. How are you? Right, dogs being dogs. Okay, so codependency I see as an adaptive response to shame. And shame begins early on in childhood. Now, it's very, very intricately set up. But there again, you may have heard me babbling on about this in the beginning. If we look at the creation story in the book of Genesis, when we lived in oneness, when we lived in this metaphorical Eden of beauty and oneness and connection, and then we disobeyed God and ate the fruit from the forbidden tree, the very first thing we did after that was we covered our nakedness. And it's written in the Bible because we felt shame. So my research has been, is shame really our core wound? Is addiction an adaptive response to shame? Is codependency an adaptive response to shame? Is all of these feelings, is shame the original trauma that if we are feeling shamed, we are more likely to attract predators and indeed volatile behaviour towards us, right? That's a whole other conversation. But codependency, if you've got difficulty making decisions, if you've got valuing yourself, if you've got difficulty identifying your feelings, and one of the great things we see in the therapeutic environment is that when you ask somebody about a situation that occurred, like a violent part in a relationship, they give you the facts. Well, they did this, and this. Yeah, but how did you feel? But they did this, and this. How did that make you feel? But they did this, and this. So really, when you're working in this stuff, it's starting to identify how you feel, right? And what it is that you actually feel, because you've never been allowed to have your own feelings. So children are shamed very, very early on. I mean, like when I was a wee guy, I was a wee sissy. I used to cry all the time. And I remember being told, if you don't stop crying, I'll give you something to cry about, right? So how many listen to how parents communicate with their children? Like if they're sad, child's sad, really? Why are you sad? And then they go and show them something in the internet about Africa and children that are starving. Look, you've got nothing to be sad about. You should count your blessings. Right? So all of these kind of behaviours from dysfunctional parenting sets up shame in the organism, in the child as it's starting to develop. Right? And then we then start to have maladaptive responses, and we start to set up codependent relationships. Now, why I love this so much is I spent 4 years, no I never, I'm lying, I spent 3 years in the Fellowship for Codependency. And going through the steps for addiction and working through addiction, certainly the next step when I found my way into the Fellowship for Codependency, which was in, do you know what, maybe it was 4 years. Do you know it was 4 years? It was around about September 2014 I found my way into the fellowship meeting. Now, to put this into perspective around about codependency, right? If you look at Cocaine Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, and you go and you open up the internet and look for meetings in your area, I'm guaranteed you're going to find one that'll be on within the next hour. Guarantee you. You'll get a fellowship meeting somewhere, right? Codependency, there was one meeting on a Wednesday in Glasgow and one meeting on a Sunday in Edinburgh, because this topic for some reason is just not getting the media or attention that it deserves. It really doesn't. It's where we find ourselves doing something for someone else. So I'm still in the stages now while walking, minding my footing, and attempting to explain codependency to you. Now, I have 2 examples of my codependency that's came up through this lockdown, if you like, right? And the first one was, I do some work for a retreat in Portugal, and they were wanting to add me onto their website. So they required a significant amount of writing and blogging and bios, etc, etc, etc. And I absolutely head down, as soon as I was asked for it, head down, knuckled in, got it done, got it taken care of, got it sent off, right? Then they would send me another question, I would knuckle down, I'd put things that I had to do aside in order to get that taken care of. Now you could look at that both ways. It's a job and I've got to take care of what they need done, and that I'm putting my own stuff aside. And I got that done, right? I have got one of my websites that I paid for 2 years ago, and the woman is waiting for me to give her 1 page of information so that she can publish it. And I haven't yet done that, right? But when somebody else asks me to do something, I jump at it. Second example, a friend of mine, Willie, he's in the building trade. He's 70 years old, Gemmy guy, texts me up, Ross, now this guy works 7 days a week, you know, he's just a grafter. You never see him dressed, he's always in his work clothes. Sent me a message just like that, Ross, I've got an upset stomach, I'm not feeling well. I've got some steel that needs to be picked up. Could you go and pick up the trailer and go and pick up the steel? It's like, no problem, jumped at it, right? I've got stuff lying round about my own property that needs to get taken care of, and am I taking care of it? No. So a codependent person finds it easier to do something for somebody else than it is to do something for themselves, because the truth of a codependent is there is no self. Now, yesterday, the self, talking about the self, is not something that comes up very much in psychiatry, or in psychiatry, you know, which is those that use the DSM-5 form, which is those that are labelling our personality disorders. So codependency, I believe, is an adaptive response to shame, because we were shamed as children. Now, imagine you were working with a 5-year-old child, right? And you said, how happy are you on a scale from 1 to 10? And they said 7. And you were like that. What would it take for you to be 100% happy? And the 5-year-old child turns round and says to you, for my mum to like me more. Right? So what's happening in the psyche of that 5-year-old child? Already, that child doesn't feel good enough. Right? So when we don't feel good enough, we look for validation from the external world because we're not able to validate ourselves. We're not able to validate. So codependency has been wrapped around, oh, you're a codependent because you're in a relationship with an addict, right? But in actual fact, from my stance, which is different from others, is that the addict's actually a codependent. The addict is using substances, i.e. alcohol or drugs, in order to fill that void, or rather that emptiness, right? And there's 2 different types of emptiness that's associated with codependency. There's an existential emptiness, and indeed there's a psychological emptiness. Now, they both differ massively. Existential emptiness, you're not going to suffer depression from, but psychological emptiness, you most probably would. Now, codependency is set up in childhood. So, like, bringing it back to me for examples here, but my mother and father divorced when I was 14. Now, if you study or look at the studies for the generic around about children that have had parents that have divorced or separated, the child has a belief that that was their fault, that somewhere it was something to do with them that caused their mother or father to separate, or indeed they weren't good enough as children. That's what caused the mum and dad to separate, which is completely and utterly preposterous. But nonetheless, if you look at the genetic studies in children that have parents that separated, the parent internalises that as that they're not good enough and that they're to blame. Now, the reason that I'm telling you that is that I then, at 14 years old, before I became an addict, but just marginally before I became an addict, that was where I set up codependency traits, because what I would try and do was I would try and appease my mum and make my mum feel better about the current situation. And that could have meant getting involved in belittling or indeed negative talk around about the other parent, right? Shortly after that, that's when I jumped into addiction. It was shortly after that that I started experimenting with marijuana and alcohol, and bingo, I had a solution to my emptiness. So, codependence, the enabler, the if you've got a partner that's an alcoholic and you make excuses for them, if you've got a partner that's violent and you're making excuses for them, if you're constantly trying to fix things, if you're a people pleaser, if you have difficulty saying no, and as I've said in one of my earlier vlogs, my lack of self-esteem was so high at one point in my life that I used to let people come into my car and smoke, and I'd wake up in the morning, I'm paying a monthly payment for the car, I'm paying for the fuel to go and pick them up, I'm dropping them back off at their house and pretty much taking care of them. They're not giving me any money towards the car payments or indeed the fuel, and then I was having to go out in the morning and hoover up the fag ash. I mean, it's like, really? So, for me, we're in the middle of the week, codependency is my favourite subject, I absolutely love it, but it's also my least understood because it's so complex and it's interwoven into the fabric of our very earliest of development and childhood trauma. And I believe that codependency is an adaptive response to... Hi, Alison. Hi. Alison. Hiya. Sorry. Codependency is an adaptive response to shame, and it's learning how to heal that shame that binds us, because we can't, it's words I'm not really great at using, like the authentic self or the true self, but really it's back to that question, what do you want to do? You've got all the time in the world, what do you want to do? And people just don't know what to do with themselves. That's why it's a very, very different breed. People that are employed versus people that are self-employed. People going to work and say to somebody, right, I want you to take that and I want you to drive that to there and I want you to drop that off there and I want you to take that there. People that are codependent are more likely to be led rather than to lead. And codependent behaviour in relationships with regards to addiction is where we would enable. It's like your son's a drug addict, so you give him money for drugs, but then you tell your pals you want him to stop taking drugs when you're actually buying the drugs for him, or you're taking the alcohol in. Now, as I kind of marriaged it over, addiction and codependency, I think, run hand in hand. And basically it's a place where we never felt, we never felt met, we never felt mirrored. Now, if we had, again, a parent that wasn't in touch with how they felt, that were avoidant or unavailable, and we would never get that sense of self, so we would never be able to be validated by that. I mean, you can look at, depends on the level of pathology, but you can look at, hi Alison Marr, you can look at the level of pathology, and I went to a Christian school, right, which I'm not slagging, it was actually quite a good school in a lot of ways, and it was crap in a lot of other ways, but nonetheless there was very different cultures of Christianity went to that school. But particularly in Braidwood, where I was brought up, a wee town between Kirlook and Lanark, there was a massive amount of brethren people in it, right? And I remembered this particular person that lived across the road from me, they were brethren as well, and they gave me an opinion after my mum and dad separated about my family dynamics, I guess, as an adolescent. And I remember thinking to myself, is that your opinion, or is that you pro-vatumly communicating your parents, what your parents think? And I think I said that to them. And I remember turning round, I was only about 14, I don't think it bought me their friendship, but I turned round and thought to myself, yeah, it is bad, it's difficult, but I can't begin to imagine what it's like not having a TV, not being allowed to have a camera, how you must constantly compare yourself to others that can. And that person looked like really stunned how strict they were. They didn't have a television in their house, these people. They didn't have a camera. They weren't allowed to use a camera. And it was a very, very, very strict Christian upbringing where the father was very authoritarian. Right, now, you don't need to be Christian to have an authoritarian father, right? But that model of the father being at the top of the hate table, and there's a lot of chauvinism can come along in that doctrine of theology as well. But there could be chauvinists that aren't. But what I'm getting to, the point that I'm getting to here is that codependency can actually, it's never healthy, but it can become less pathological, provided that the person is okay with their defined role. So back in that old school model where the father would go out and work and be this authoritarian type person that would be very, tall, dark and silent type man, and the mother would take after the house, would look after the house, would create meals, would look after the children, that was her role. Those relationships, when you study them, can be highly codependent. It can be very codependent, but they worked. And if they work, that's okay. Now, people pleasing, if you're running around and you're looking for validation in people pleasing behaviours, then I would encourage you to look into codependency. Codependency for me is the cherry on the cake, it's the icing on the cake. It is so intertwined with addiction, it's like brother and sister, it's so enmeshed and emerged. It's one of the hardest topics there is to study, but it's the most rewarding when we can start to see that perhaps if we have to move as a society into co-creating a more habitable world which would work on interdependence rather than dependence or independence, or certainly codependency, then if you are looking that you adhere to a world which is going to be rich in spiritual values of co-creation and indeed interdependency, and you value that, before we can get through that door of co-creation and interdependency, we really have to look at the areas where we're dependent, fiercely independent, or indeed codependent on our environment, and we're not relying on ourselves. Now, codependency, one of the best books that I've read on it are Codependency for Dummies. It's dead simple. As I've said, I've spoke about Melanie Beattie, great novel, great author, but I'm not completely aligned with her belief system. And how can you hold boundaries? How can you hold boundaries in a relationship? How can you be in a relationship without giving yourself away? And I would only be loved if, I will only get attention if. So I play the good girl role, or I play the good boy role, or indeed I play the bad boy role. And one of my mentors, teachers, back for a long time ago, his current research is showing that, for an example, let's use abusive relationships, that in actual fact, in the chemistry of the brain, there are endorphins released because there's an innate, almost like an intuitive sense that this person is going to be destructive or abusive, and you get a high off of that, right? So again, it's back to me. A lot of people don't agree with me, that's okay. I think we can become addicted to absolutely anything. I think we've actually become addicted into believing that this reality that we inhabit is the way that we see it, because we became addicted to the lens of which we view our reality, rather than seeing it as innocent. But before we could see that existential reality as innocent, we would have to see ourselves as innocent, and that's a very difficult thing to do when we are so engulfed with so much shame and so much toxicity. So, codependency, I could talk about that all day really. It's a fascinating subject, and I would encourage you, Mental Health Week, if you are looking at your mental health, and whether that be depression or addiction or whatever it is that you're suffering from, rather than looking at it from a singular label that you've put on it yourself or indeed by others, maybe look at it from another perspective. And that perspective that I would encourage you to do is look at codependency. Codependency is an adaptive response to our inner emptiness. It's like if you know people that are very, very busy, that make themselves very busy, and they want to be the ones that are recognised for projects, you know. So there's a team of people that's got involved in a project, but actually when it gets written up, it's like they write about it from a single place. They don't actually acknowledge that there was another 5 members in team, or indeed 5 other teams that were involved. It's all about them. Codependent behaviour. People can become codependent on God or your understanding of God, be that a deity. You can become codependent on absolutely anything. So it's really about being able to experience that level of emptiness. It's like, there was something else that came to my mind there, but it's like there's a movie comes out at the cinema or something like that, and you phone a friend and you're like that, look, this movie's come out, do you want to come with me? And nobody gets back to you, but you do not go and see that movie because you don't have anyone to go with. And then before you know it, the movie's not on at the cinema any longer, and you're watching it on Netflix, and you're watching it on your own on Netflix anyway, so you'd as well just go to the cinema and go to see it because you wanted to see it. Don't wait for somebody else to fulfil your happiness or indeed your needs. Get out and get after it. It's there. And a happy journeying on that. Codependency, 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 phenomenal subject. And happy digging. Wish you a successful day and be happy. And there's my buddies just texting me about meeting up at the river. That's why I'm carrying a rucksack. I'm not like I'm the littlest hobo and I'm running away from home or anything like that. Okay, have a great day. Wish you all the best.